Hello there, my name is Matt Saunders. I'm with Adaptavist. Thank you for joining us on this presentation, where I'm going to talk about our guiding map for DevOps. So I'm the head of DevOps at Adaptavist, but I'll spare you talking about Adaptavist for now. I'll talk about them at the end. So what are we going to go through in this session? So it's a fairly well-established pattern of how to do DevOps well. We've been in the DevOps era for over a decade now. And there's some pretty good information out there, lots of sources of how to do DevOps well. I'm going to go through some of these because that's a kind of prerequisite for what I want to talk about, the actual, the bread and butter of the presentation a bit later on. So we're going to go through DevOps, what doing DevOps well looks like, and how we measure that. So how we measure succeeding at DevOps. Then I'm going to take a slightly different direction and go off and look at how we find the value of what we're contributing when we do DevOps. And then we're going to talk about value streams and Wardley mapping and mapping the streams. And then right at the end, I'll talk about how to put it all together in one big coherent whole, hopefully. So let's start by going into what do we mean by doing DevOps well? Well, I think it comes down to basically three things here. Firstly, having good source code management and continuous integration. The second thing is having good access to environments. And the third thing is around getting changes flowing and getting changes flowing smoothly through your organization. So let's dig into those in a little bit more detail. So good source code management and continuous integration. This should be a panacea that everyone is aiming for, and we think a lot of organizations have reached this. In my adventures as a consultant with Adaptavist and also working internally within Adaptavist, we like to think we're doing this reasonably well, and we see this done fairly well across many organizations out there. So the three tenets of good SCM and CI: firstly, keeping everything in version control systems, because it's never too soon to have a peer review of your data. And we can tie that sort of stuff back to sprint planning. So if everything's in the version control system, we can work out exactly what we're going to do up front with our sprint planning and then go and do it and see the results in our SCM. That lets us then build continuously. We like to do continuous builds in a DevOps world because smaller incremental changes are easier to manage. We're getting away from that waterfall environment where lots and lots of changes would go into a single release. And because nobody knew how those changes would interoperate when the build inevitably broke, we wouldn't really know what caused it. So we can find and fix divergences very, very early on by doing continuous integration. The third thing here is about being able to deploy at will. So we can test and check our changes as soon as we possibly can after they've been written, after they've been integrated, so that we can tighten those feedback loops. If we go back to Gene Kim's 3 ways of DevOps, this is one of the key things here, is being able to test these things. It's being able to get that software out there, either in front of users or in front of a developer who's seeing the results of their work, or a tester. Let's tighten those feedback loops so that we can see if everything went well, and if not, we can adjust and go again. Access to environments is the second tenet here of good DevOps. We want to allow devs access to environments, and by that what I mean is an environment that looks a bit like or a lot like your production environment. Gone are the days where having a production environment alone and a developer's laptop where changes were tested was good enough. What we want to be doing here, and what we're seeing increasing consumption of, is having pre-built or on-demand environments that mimic production, maybe not quite on the same scale, but are good enough so that a dev can use an environment with everything mocked out for the things that he's not already, or she is not already using, and that are dedicated to their cause. We don't want to make our devs queue either. Waiting for environments harms flow. So again, anti-patterns that we see here are things like a single dev environment with multiple developers waiting in line to test their changes out. Triggering these sort of things from CI environments is now something that people should be doing. Production-like, well, it's difficult, but it's necessary to make environments production-like. And what I mean by that is that often we find that production environments are built with a combination of automation and some other stuff, some hand-coded stuff over here, some things that were clicked on in an Amazon Web Services console over there. Those sort of things make it difficult to replicate production environments, because we want to be doing everything as code, because if everything is code, then we can replicate those things. Other issues we find are with scale. Perhaps our production environment has got 100 million entries in the production database. If we want to be testing our systems out, then we possibly don't need all those 100 million entries. Maybe there's personal information in them as well. So you have to look at data masking as well, so that that personal information isn't replicated further than it needs to be. So getting those environments of an appropriate size and scale is really, really important. So a key thing we want to be getting to with all of these pieces of automation and code is to be able to get our change flow well regulated and well controlled. We want to be able to make it easy to get through any gates that the organization has. We see things like change advisory boards mentioned a lot in regards to deploying things to production. But again, it's 2021 now, and we're figuring out ways of allaying people's concerns so that we don't have to have a checkbox or lots of people ticking off on a spreadsheet that a release is good to go. With automated testing, browser-based testing, for example, for web apps, which we can do in an increasingly sophisticated manner these days. So we can test real world scenarios. You've got a web app. Can users still log into it? We can automate those sort of tests, just as an example. And finally, on this point, decoupling comes in here. We often talk about microservices and monoliths. And the key takeaway